Well, my first reaction was surprise that no one had reached out to me, in the past, when such things have happened. In fact, it's just happening now. People might option my books or whatever. Um, for a long time now, really, ever since I heard that Murphy was planning to make Gein the subject of his third season, I have been feeling uh, aggrieved and resentful because I worried that Ryan and his co-creator Ian Brennan were going to kind of rip off my book,
Hmm.
under the pretext that it was all in the public domain, that Gein was this public figure. And there are things, when I wrote Deviant back in 1987, true crime was considered a kind of pulpy subliterary genre. And the model that I was using was Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which he called a nonfiction novel, by which he meant, applying novelistic techniques to telling a true story. That has since become known as creative nonfiction. And I was very consciously writing in that mode when I did Deviant.
Mhm.
I tell people that my motto at the time was taken from the last line of the first chapter of Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mhm.
Where the narrator, the big chief, says, "It's the truth, even if it didn't happen." So there are certain scenes in my book, primarily having to do with Gein's interactions with his mother,
Mhm.
because there are no real, I mean, other than the few things Ed said about it in his confessions, uh, we don't really know what went on between them. So they were sort of imaginative reconstructions on my part. So my main worry at the time, and going up to the moment I watched the show,
Mhm.
was that uh, there was going to be a lot of unauthorized use of my book.
Mhm.
After watching the show, I mean, there is some unauthorized use of my book, I feel, but the show that veers so wildly from the reality of the case.
Mhm.
So much of it is pure over the top fabrication
Okay.
that now I'm mostly upset that all the people who watch the show are going to think they're seeing the true story of Ed Gein, which, they're obviously in terms of broad outlines, his relation to his domineering mother, the grave robbery, the making of these ghastly objects out of the body parts, and so on. Those are pretty accurate, but a very large percentage of the show is just is just made up.
Yeah. Ryan Murphy does have a trend of dramatizing his projects. Did you watch the Jeffrey Dahmer and the Menendez brothers seasons as well before this?
I did not. So much of my time is spent researching and writing about crime
Mhm.
that I don't watch a lot of true crime stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Ryan Murphy, Ed Gein has become a kind of mythic figure. And on the one level, Ryan Murphy has every right to treat the story dramatically.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I made my book dramatic, but I did it with sticking with the facts. I mean, what Murphy has done, I haven't seen the other shows, but certainly in this case, well, either Murphy or Ian Brennan, who wrote it, just invented these outrageous things, which have no relationship to the truth, the true facts of the Ed Gein story.
What was the most outrageous to you in terms of the entire show? Was there one specific storyline or one character portrayal, human betrayal that you?
Well, I mean, even when I watch the very first scene where you see Ed engage in autoerotic asphyxiation, I'm like, where did that come from?
You were like, "Oh, this is
But
going to be an interesting journey. We're starting off with the first scene like this."
yeah, but there's no evidence
Yeah.
whatsoever
Mm.
that Ed ever enjoyed that particular activity. Um, But then, the way he treated the character of Adeline Watkins,
Hmm.
the real who is this beautiful young woman who's very close to him. I mean, the real Adeline Watkins, uh, first of all, I don't want to seem cruel, but if you see photographs of her, she bears a striking resemblance to Margaret Hamilton in The Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
Um, and their relationship, I'm pretty convinced, didn't really consist of anything more, than possibly maybe Gein once asked her roller skating or something. They didn't really have a relationship. She was kind of a publicity hound when all the media descended on Plainfield after the discovery of the crimes. She suddenly came forward as Ed Gein's girlfriend. But, the notion that Ed Gein, uh, helped solve the Ted Bundy murder. The other thing, I mean, and
I
this
had many questions about that because I didn't feel like that was entirely accurate. I assume it wasn't.
well,
The
not
way
only
they
was
led
it not
into the Ted
entirely
Bundy thing,
accurate,
I was like, huh?
no, it's wildly, wildly made up. The other thing that's made up, very, importantly, is that Gein wasn't a serial killer.
Yes. By
The whole
definition,
notion
right? By
of,
definition. By
by
definition,
definition, he was not a serial killer because the term serial killer was specifically coined to describe a certain kind of psychopathic sex murderer, an extreme sexual sadist like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy, who derived erotic pleasure from torturing and then killing victims. That was not what Gein was about.
Mhm.
I mean, he did kill these two women, but he executed them very swiftly. He was basically just interested in bringing their corpses home, so he could dissect them. He was not a serial killer. And the notion that all these serial killers at the end, Brudos, I forget his name, were inspired by Gein. A, Richard Speck.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel pretty confident that none of them even knew who Gein was.
Right.
They wouldn't have been inspired by them because he was not a serial killer.
Right.
So, my jaw dropped at, how shameless the whole production was.